I do not come to this conclusion easily, as I do not consider the factual basis for it to be overwhelming. Reasonable and informed people could reach a different conclusion than the one I have arrived at. After careful reflection, I have concluded that the very high threshold required for the invocation of the Act was met. In particular, for reasons that I discuss in detail in the report, I have concluded that when the decision was made to invoke the Act on February 14th, 2022, Cabinet had reasonable grounds to believe that there existed a national emergency arising from threats to the security of Canada that necessitated the taking of special temporary measures. The fact that circumstances evolved to the point where Cabinet reasonably considered it necessary to invoke the Act is regrettable, because in my view, the situation that led to its use could likely have been avoided. As I have explained in my report, the response to the Freedom Convoy included a series of policing failures, though I have also identified sound practices employed by some police services in their response to relevant events. Some of the missteps may have been small, but others were significant. Taken together, they contributed to a situation that spun out of control. The failures were not only in policing. Preparing for and responding to situations of threat and urgency in a federal system requires governments at all levels and those who lead them to rise above politics and collaborate for the common good. In January and February 2022, this did not always happen. Had police forces and governments better anticipated and prepared for the extent of political and social discontent exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in the environment of misinformation and disinformation so prevalent today, and had they collaborated more effectively, there could have been a different response to this unprecedented situation. It's likely that such preparation could have avoided the necessity of invoking the Emergencies Act. I determined that the measures taken by the federal government were, for the most part, appropriate and effective and contributed to bringing a return to order without loss of life or serious injury to people or property. I also found, however, that in a number of respects, these measures were deficient. These included important aspects of the Emergency Economic Measures Order, such as the absence of any discretion related to the freezing of accounts or assets, and the failure to provide a clear way for individuals to have their assets unfrozen once they were no longer engaged in illegal conduct. The Parliament that passed the Emergencies Act in 1988 went to great lengths to ensure that its use would be subject to robust accountability and public scrutiny. I hope that this inquiry and my report have contributed to achieving this. On previous occasions, I've said that this Commission's task is first and foremost to be a tool of accountability and to foster public confidence. The invocation of the Emergencies Act was a significant event. Members of the public have a right to know what the government did and why they did it. The Commission has already contributed to the public's right to know through its public hearings. In the report, I chronicle the origins of the Freedom Convoy. I conclude that it was not an organization with clear leadership. Rather, it was a movement comprised of people who shared certain social, economic, and political grievances, but also had countless individual views. Many of the protesters' concerns long predated COVID-19 pandemic. They were rooted in feelings of loss of place within Canadian society, alienation, economic anxieties, and loss of faith in government. That said, the pandemic and responding public health measures were an important motivator that caused the Freedom Convoy to mobilize. The COVID-19 pandemic was perhaps a once-in-a-generation crisis. Governments, federal, provincial, municipal, responded in good faith to circumstances as they understood them. Second, however one views those responses, they imposed real hardships on thousands of Canadians. One of the most cherished rights enjoyed by Canadians is the right to engage in political protest. The ability of individuals and groups to publicly voice their dissent enriches and empowers our democracy. It's hardly surprising that government health measures would cause some form of protest in response, given their impact on people's lives. What was surprising was the size and scale of these protests and the way in which they proliferated across the country. The majority of those who participated in the protests were animated by a genuine desire to engage in peaceful demonstrations so that their voices would be heard by leaders in government. They wished to exercise their fundamental right to express their political views, and they had a right to do so. Amongst the many who intended to protest peacefully were others who had more sinister goals or who were willing to engage in dangerous conduct to achieve their desired ends. For reasons that I discuss in my report, what began as a massive protest evolved into something entirely unprecedented, an occupation of the core of the nation's capital.